Hey, this is Grant with Grant Bakes, and in today's video, I'm going to show you how to make one of the easiest loaves of artisan bread you can ever make. This is a completely no-knead recipe, and you can make it all without any kind of special tools. Here's how you make it. You're going to need 3 cups of all-purpose flour or bread flour. I've got the cheapest all-purpose flour I could find here, just to show you that you can use any type of flour and still make good bread. Put 3 cups of this flour into your mixing bowl. And then after you put in your flour, you're going to add the salt. For this, I'm using Morton kosher salt, and I'm going to be putting in 1 1/4 teaspoons. If you want to go by grams for this recipe, I've got a link in the description to the recipe that has grams and volumetric measurements. So 1 1/4 teaspoons of kosher salt. And then you're going to add just a small 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast. You can use a packet or the bottled yeast, whichever one you have, but just make sure it's a small 1/4 teaspoon. The reason we need just a small amount of yeast is because we're using a wet dough and we want it to rise for a really long time. This small amount of yeast will allow the dough to rise slowly on the counter over a period of about 12 hours, and that'll give time for the gluten to develop in the dough without any kind of kneading by hand. After the yeast, it's time for the very last ingredient, 1 1/2 cups of water. I'm just using the same dry measuring cup to measure in the water. It's really no big deal, 1 1/2 cups. Then stir all these ingredients together with some kind of spoon. You could use a metal spoon or a wooden spoon. It really doesn't matter either. You just want to mix everything together until there aren't really any dry bits of flour left. You want the flour to absorb all of that water. And then once everything is sufficiently mixed together, you can go ahead and clean off the flour off of the spoon, and then you're going to want to scrape down the sides of the bowl too. Everyone thinks bread baking is all about glitz and glamour. No one talks about the bowl scraping. That reminds me that I could be using my bowl scraper for this part, but I decided not to use any special tools for this video, so a metal spoon works just fine. Just scrape off the flour from the side of the bowl. Then here comes the easiest part of a no-knead artisan bread. Just cover up the dough and let it sit and rise for about 12 hours. You can go 12 to 15 hours. You're basically just looking for the dough to double in size. And here I am 12 hours later, and my dough is nice, tall, and puffy. If you poke your dough at this point, you should feel that it's full of air. And that's 100% thanks to that tiny 1/4 teaspoon of yeast that we used in this bread dough. At this point, we're ready to shape the dough, so get out a metal sheet pan and just cover it with some parchment paper. You're going to shape the dough and then place it on the parchment paper and bake it on that sheet pan later. Now we're ready to shape the dough, so go ahead and put a bunch of flour on your counter. If you're used to bread baking already, you probably don't need to put much flour at all, but if you're brand new to baking, put a bunch of flour on the counter because this will really help you deal with the sticky dough. Sticky dough is no fun when it sticks to your hands. And for the way I'm going to show you how to shape the dough, it's okay if there's a lot of flour on the counter. It'll actually help you out. Go ahead and just work your way around the bowl with your fingertips, separating the dough from the sides of the bowl. Just make your way all around that bowl, and then flip out the dough onto the floury part of your counter. Doesn't really matter which side, as long as one side is covered with flour. Then you're going to flip the dough over and get flour on the other side. Really don't be afraid to get all parts of this dough really floury, even the sides and edges of the dough. That'll help you with the shaping method that I'm about to show you. Now, I don't know what you would call this shape, if it even has a name, but you're going to stretch your dough out and then twist it into like a corkscrew shape. This is a really easy shaping method for beginners. So stretch your loaf out, and then once it starts to give a little resistance, flip it over and keep stretching it. Once you feel a little more resistance, flip it over again and give it another stretch. Stretch it out to roughly the length of your sheet pan. Now with your long, flat length of dough, go ahead and just start twisting it into kind of a corkscrew shape. Twist on the sides, twist it in the middle, twist it all the way around. See, this is where the floury dough really helps because it doesn't stick to your hands at all while you're doing this. Then just take your dough and transfer it carefully onto that sheet pan covered with parchment paper. Then go ahead and adjust the dough so that it's straight and there really is an even thickness throughout the loaf. If you have any really lumpy places, those areas will take longer to cook than the other parts. So make it as even as you can. And here you have an artisan looking twisted baguette type thing. And unlike a real baguette, this took almost no skill to make or to shape. I think that's pretty cool. Go ahead and cover this up with a kitchen towel and let it rest and rise on your counter for about 2 hours. You're basically looking for it to double in size again, and then it'll be ready to bake. So about half hour before you're ready to bake, preheat your oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and then prepare your dough. Pretty much just uncover it, and it should be doubled in size by now. You can poke it with your finger to see if it feels ready. What you're looking for is your finger will make an indentation, and then the dough will bounce back, but not quite all the way. That's how you know it's ready. If that's confusing, just don't worry about it. As long as it's puffing up, it's ready to bake. Go ahead and move this to the middle rack of your preheated oven, and you're gonna bake this for 30 to 40 minutes until golden brown. If you've ever heard of baking with steam, it gives the bread a really good crust. For this easy bread, I just like to spray it with a water bottle. There's just water in here, nothing fancy. Just spray the bread a few times and spray the sides of the oven a few times. That should provide plenty of steam for your bread to bake up nice and crusty on the outside. Keep baking that for 30 to 40 minutes at 450 degrees Fahrenheit. At around the 30-minute mark, I decided to turn my bread around just so it could get even browning on both sides. If your oven is anything like mine, you might want to do the same thing. Just keep baking it for 5 to 10 more minutes after you turn it around. After 35 minutes of baking, this is what my bread looked like. Go ahead and remove yours and put it on a cutting board or a wire rack or something. Let it cool down for at least an hour before you slice in. While this bread obviously wasn't the prettiest looking on the outside, the point of homemade bread is the fact that you made it yourself and that it tastes good. So I'm going to go ahead and slice in, show you what it looks like on the inside. It's got a tight but airy crumb, and all those little holes come from the hours and hours of that yeast doing its magic throughout the dough. This bread also makes the perfect slices if you just want a smaller piece of bread to serve alongside a soup or a stew, or if you want little slices of bread to serve with a meat and cheese tray or a charcuterie board or something. This is the perfect, easy, no-knead loaf of bread to make. Trust me, once you slice this bread into pieces, everyone will think you just bought it from some professional bakery. No one will know the difference. If you found this recipe helpful, go ahead and hit the like button on this video. That'll really help it spread to more people, and I'd really appreciate that. And if you like bread, sourdough, and pizza, why not subscribe to my channel, Grant Bakes? I would love to have you stick around for more videos. Why not start with this video right here? This is the one that YouTube thinks you haven't seen yet.